The chronicles of human history are awash with conflict, most of them ignited by the fires of hegemonic ambition, the insatiable thirst for power, or the expansion of borders. Many others have erupted over the cold calculations of coin, the struggle for economic dominance, or the desperate grab for natural resources. Yet the war that forged the United States, molding it into a titan among nations, sprang from a motive far more profound and haunting than mere greed or territorial lust. It was born of a visceral sense of deprivation, a feeling of being so stifled and oppressed that the very essence of living as a free person was being stripped away. What remains most chilling about that fateful dawn was its utter ambiguity. Amidst the swirling mists of Lexington, a single shot rang out, shattering the morning silence. To this day, history cannot name the finger that pulled the trigger. We only know that in the wake of that first discharge, 8 men fell lifeless upon the dew-drenched grass. From that singular, crystalline moment, a mighty empire began to confront the ultimate nightmare of every great power, the sight of ordinary, vulnerable people who had suddenly, inexplicably, lost their capacity for fear. Picture this tragic scene as if it were a painting composed of jarring contrasts. On a small, unassuming green in Lexington, shrouded in an eerie silence, 77 local men commoners of the colonies stood their ground. Facing them was the rigid, imposing formation of roughly 700 British regulars. On one side stood the finest, most battle-hardened elite of the world's reigning superpower, the Great British Empire, armed to the teeth. On the other side stood a ragtag assembly, farmers who had spent their lives tilling the soil, humble shopkeepers, and skilled artisans. Only a day prior, these men had lived quiet, perhaps even mundane, lives. They were not born to be warriors or the subjects of epic legends. They were simply people who had been pushed, squeezed, and marginalized until there was not a single inch left to retreat. It was this intersection of desperation and sudden, blinding courage that made the moment more haunting and heroic than any scripted saga. History, after all, rarely shifts its course for the extraordinary individuals destined for greatness. It truly turns only when the most ordinary of people decide they can no longer live with their heads bowed in submission. In that heart-pounding tension, the shot heard round the world was fired. That lone crack of gunfire remains a mystery. No one truly knows who ignited the spark of revolution. But in a few fleeting seconds, the air grew thick with acrid gunpowder smoke. Screams of terror pierced the fog, and blood stained the Lexington green, casting a shroud of mourning over the small town. 8 colonists fell, forever resting on the soil of the liberty they so desperately craved. From that agonizing yet resolute moment, a young America was thrust into a life-or-death struggle. A war that would not only redraw the map of a vast continent, but would also fundamentally alter how humanity perceives the sacred concepts of freedom, power, and courage. Following the horrific volleys at Lexington, the British, fueled by imperial arrogance, continued their march 7 miles further toward Concord. Their objective was clear and meant to intimidate, to locate, seize, and destroy the massive arms cache that the Massachusetts militia was rumored to be hiding. Upon reaching Concord, they searched the town and burned a small amount of military supplies. However, the sight of black smoke billowing into the afternoon sky misled the local militia, watching from the surrounding woods, into believing the entire town was being razed. The news spread like wildfire, fueling a blaze of resentment and resolve. At the North Bridge, roughly 400 militiamen, clutching aged muskets but brimming with fervor, lay in wait. Again, the British fired first, spilling more blood. But this time, the militia did not waver. They returned fire. From that moment on, the British retreat back to Boston ceased to be a disciplined march. It devolved into a 16-mile journey through a literal hell. Every tree, every boulder, and every stone wall became a potential sniper's nest for embittered colonial marksmen. As the sun dipped lower, more militiamen poured out from the surrounding farms and villages, harrying and ambushing the king's troops. By nightfall, 73 British soldiers lay dead on the land they had intended to conquer. history is littered with uprisings crushed in their infancy by the sheer weight of authority. But this was different. This was not a mere riot. It was the birth of a fierce idea, a flame that once ignited would prove impossible to extinguish, the idea of independence. To truly grasp why such an upheaval occurred on those small greens and bridges, one must look back to 1760. At that time, the eastern seaboard of North America was home to 13 distinct colonies, each with its own unique identity. It was a home to over 1.5 million people, a vibrant, multi-ethnic tapestry of English, Scots, Irish, Germans, Dutch, and enslaved Africans. Despite their disparate languages and customs, they were bound by a singular, invisible thread. They considered themselves loyal subjects of the British Crown. They did not call themselves Americans. The notion of an independent nation was an alien concept. Instead, they were proud Virginians, New Yorkers, or Pennsylvanians. But above all, they were children of the British Empire. When King George II passed away and his grandson, George III, ascended the throne in 1760, the colonies celebrated with fervor. Church bells rang through the streets, taverns overflowed with toasts, and portraits of the young king were hung in homes and shops as icons of devotion. To them, Britain was not just the mother country. It was the source of fair laws, sophisticated culture, thriving trade, and most importantly, a shield against all dangers. At that time, no one had any reason to believe such a sacred bond could ever be broken. Remarkably, these 13 colonies were far from a united community. Each region possessed its own economic and social DNA, often clashing with the others. New England, shaped by a harsh climate and long coastlines, lived by fishing, shipbuilding, and trade, all underpinned by a stern Puritan tradition that valued education and communal discipline. In contrast, the middle colonies, New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, were a dynamic melting pot of merchants and diverse religions, where Quakers and Germans lived side by side, forced by circumstance to learn the art of tolerance. Then there was the South Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia, a world of sprawling tobacco and rice plantations, where wealthy elites lived like English aristocrats. Tragically, this was also a land where, in many counties, enslaved people outnumbered the free, highlighting a profound and bitter inequality. Each region viewed its neighbors with suspicion. Northerners saw Southerners as lazy and overly decadent. Southerners viewed Northerners as meddlesome fanatics. Both agreed the middle colonies were too disorganized and lacked a clear identity. There was no sign that these fractured communities would ever become one people. In fact, only years earlier, they had a golden opportunity to unite and failed miserably. In 1754, as the French pushed down from Canada to build forts in the Ohio Valley, threatening British interests, the Albany Congress was convened. There, Benjamin Franklin, one of the era's most brilliant minds, proposed a plan of union for a collective government and defense. While the delegates liked the idea on paper, every single colonial assembly back home rejected it. Their sense of local autonomy and fear of losing regional power far outweighed the threat of external invasion. They preferred to face danger alone rather than share authority. In the mid-18th century, North America was not a budding nation, but a collection of wealthy, growing communities that were suspicious of one another and fiercely fragmented. And they were, indeed, wealthy. At that time, the colonists enjoyed one of the highest standards of living in the Western world. Land was vast and affordable, food was plentiful, and taxes were incredibly low. While a citizen in England might pay 5 to 7% of their income to the Crown, a colonist paid a mere 1 to 1.5%. They were guarded by the world's most powerful navy and a formidable royal army. To put it bluntly, in 1760, the average colonist lived a more comfortable and less burdened life than the average person in England. This prosperity was the irony of their fate. People who are comfortable do not revolt because of hunger or destitution. They rise up when they feel that their inherent rights and sacred values are being brazenly violated. The inevitable breaking point arrived after the conflict with France. In 1763, the French and Indian War ended in a resounding British victory, giving London control over nearly all the land east of the Mississippi. But this triumph came with a staggering price tag. The British national debt had soared to astronomical levels. Looking at the wealthy colonies, who had been protected by British blood and treasure, yet paid a pittance in taxes, London reached a conclusion that seemed perfectly logical from their perspective. The colonies must pay their fair share. In 1765, the Stamp Act was born, taxing nearly every piece of printed paper, from newspapers and legal documents to playing cards. To the British government, it was a modest request for contribution. To the colonists, however, it wasn't about the money, it was the principle. It was the first time Parliament had taxed them directly, without the consent of their own colonial representatives. The reaction was explosive. The cry of "no taxation without representation" became a rallying call that united the disparate regions. In Boston, angry mobs hung effigies of tax collectors, while colonial assemblies issued formal protests. Merchants organized boycotts of British goods, dealing a heavy blow to the empire's economy. Eventually, Britain repealed the Act, a massive victory for the colonies, but simultaneously passed the Declaratory Act, asserting that Parliament had the right to tax the colonies in all cases whatsoever. The dispute was no longer about pennies. It had shifted to the very core of human existence, the nature of power. By 1767, the Townshend Acts were enacted, placing duties on glass, paint, paper, and, most famously, tea. Protest flared again, and to maintain order, Britain dispatched troops to Boston, turning a vibrant port into an occupied military camp. Tension mounted daily until a frigid night in March 1770. An angry crowd began pelting British sentries with snowballs, stones, and insults. In the ensuing chaos, shots were fired. 5 colonists fell dead in the snow, their blood staining the white ground. This tragedy became known as the Boston Massacre, a permanent scar on the collective memory. An engraving by Paul Revere, depicting British soldiers coldly firing into an unarmed crowd, spread through the colonies like a plague, cementing the image of a tyrannical government. From this point on, the conflict was no longer a dry debate over legislation. It was a deeply emotional wound, and history teaches us that once politics enters the realm of the heart, it is no longer a game that can be easily controlled. Finally, in 1773, Parliament added fuel to the fire with the Tea Act. Ironically, the Act actually made tea cheaper for the colonists due to tax breaks in England. But the colonists saw the trap. If they bought the taxed tea, they were tacitly accepting Parliament's right to tax them. It was a battle of principle over price. That winter, under the cover of night in Boston Harbor, a group of patriots disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded 3 ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the icy water. The Boston Tea Party became an immortal symbol of civil disobedience. Great Britain retaliated with a series of draconian measures in 1774, which the colonists branded the Intolerable Acts. They closed Boston Harbor, suspended the Massachusetts government, and moved troops into private homes. London intended to isolate and punish Massachusetts as a warning to the others, but they fundamentally miscalculated. Instead of abandoning their neighbor, the other colonies rushed to her side in a display of unprecedented unity. The First Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. They were not yet talking about independence, but for the first time, they were acting as a single political entity. The unity that had been impossible in 1754 against the French was finally achieved against their own mother country. They had found the one thing they lacked before, a common enemy, and an invisible bond of shared grievance. This was the tinderbox that led to the night of the 18th of April, 1775. General Thomas Gage ordered a secret mission to Concord to seize the militia's weapons, but the secret was out. Paul Revere's midnight ride tore through the countryside, his cry that, "The British are coming," echoing through the dark. By dawn, the shots at Lexington and Concord had been fired, and a siege began around Boston. Within weeks, 15,000 militiamen from across New England had converged on the city. They were farmers with calloused hands, blacksmiths with soot-stained faces, and shopkeepers accustomed to scales and ledgers. They lacked ammunition, uniforms, and formal training. To any objective observer, they looked like a joke compared to the might of the British Empire. But what an empire often fails to realize is that the most dangerous foe is not a perfectly equipped army, but a group of ordinary people who have reached the unshakable conviction that if they do not stand now, their children will forever live on their knees. That is a fire that no army, no matter how grand, can easily quench. It was the Battle of Bunker Hill, occurring shortly thereafter, that confirmed this truth in a way that was as painful as it was profound. The British eventually seized the strategic high ground, but the cost was staggering. Over 1,000 casualties, a horrifying toll for a battle they had expected to be a simple rout. The Americans lost about 450 men. The message sent that day echoed through the colonies and all the way to London. These farmers weren't just troublemakers, they were soldiers who could and would fight to the bitter end. In June 1775, the Second Continental Congress convened, faced with the urgent necessity of appointing a commander-in-chief for their fledgling military force. John Adams, demonstrating his sharp political instincts, stood to nominate a gentleman from Virginia, a man who possessed an unmistakable aura of leadership, George Washington. This was more than just a military appointment, it was a masterstroke of political strategy. The war was currently centered in Massachusetts, a northern colony. By choosing a Virginian from the South to lead, Adams ensured the conflict was no longer just New England's problem. Overnight, it became a collective cause, the shared destiny of all the colonies, binding them into a single, unified front. Washington accepted the commission with sincere humility, devoid of any trace of arrogance. He harbored no illusions about the task ahead. He knew he was facing the most powerful army on the planet, an empire that would not be easily unseated. Yet, he understood something the British had yet to grasp. He didn't need to win every battle. His primary objective was simply to keep his army from disintegrating and to prevent the flame of revolution from being extinguished. To survive, to endure, and to prolong the war until the cost of conquest became an unbearable burden for the British Empire that was the only viable strategy, the only path to eventual freedom. By 1776, the war continued amidst bitter internal divisions and immense suffering. This was not merely a conflict between Americans and the British, it was a brutal civil war within the Revolution itself. Thousands of Americans remained loyalists, faithful to the crown. Neighbors turned against one another, families were torn asunder, and brothers stood on opposite sides of the firing line. In July 1776, the Continental Congress formally adopted the Declaration of Independence, a historic document announcing the birth of the United States of America. From that moment, there was no turning back. The colonies were no longer fighting for better treatment or policy reform. They were fighting to become a sovereign, independent nation. Had they lost, they would not have been treated as mere rebels, they would have been executed as traitors. The shadow of the gallows loomed over every soldier and leader, making the struggle more desperate and high stakes than ever before. Immediately following that courageous declaration came a series of dark days that nearly crushed the young revolution. In August 1776 at Long Island, the British delivered a devastating blow, shattering Washington's forces. New York fell quickly into royal hands. The American army was forced into a chaotic retreat across New Jersey, suffering through freezing temperatures and starvation. Despair led to mass desertions. By December, the revolution was gasping for air, standing on the precipice of total collapse. Washington was left with only 2,400 ragged, exhausted troops, many of whose enlistments were about to expire. In this moment of absolute desperation, he decided on one final, audacious gamble. On a frigid, ice-choked Christmas night, he led his men across the treacherous Delaware River to launch a surprise attack on the Hessian garrison at Trenton. The password whispered through the freezing darkness was, "Victory or death." The march was so brutal, it seemed like a suicide mission. But on the morning of December 26, they struck with total surprise, securing a victory that was monumental, not just militarily, but psychologically. It wasn't a world-altering strategic win, but it saved the spirit of the cause. It rescued the flickering flame of hope. Sometimes, a people in agony don't need a grand triumph immediately. They just need a small sign, a sliver of light, to prove that hope is still alive. and the fight can go on. Following the turning point at Trenton, the war dragged on through years of grueling attrition. 1777 saw another massive victory at Saratoga, where an entire British army was forced to surrender. This news reached Paris, prompting France, Britain's longtime rival, to officially enter the war as an American ally. French warships, elite troops, and much-needed capital began to flow toward the colonies, fundamentally shifting the balance of power. During that same period at Valley Forge, Washington's army endured a winter of unimaginable hardship. Thousands perished from disease and hunger. Many lacked even shoes to protect their feet from the snow. Yet, it was here that Baron von Steuben, a talented Prussian officer, arrived. With iron discipline, he transformed these armed farmers into a professional, cohesive, and battle-hardened force. When they marched out of Valley Forge in 1778, they were no longer a disorganized militia. They were a standing army capable of meeting British regulars on equal ground. Frustrated by the stalemate in the north, the British shifted their strategy to the south, believing that a wealth of loyalist support there would help them end the war quickly. Initially, the plan worked. Savannah fell, then Charleston, and thousands of American soldiers were taken prisoner. It seemed the South was lost, but the British had miscalculated. The southern colonies did not crumble. Instead, fierce engagements at Kings Mountain, Cowpens, and Guilford Courthouse systematically bled the British army of its strength and morale. Every British victory came at a cost they could not afford to pay. Conversely, every American setback was met with a renewed and fiercer determination. Ultimately, British General Cornwallis, his ranks depleted and spirits low, retreated to Yorktown, Virginia, to await rescue by the British Navy. However, the French fleet arrived first, sealing off his escape. Washington, alongside combined American and French forces, laid siege to the city. On the 19th of October 1781, in a ceremony heavy with the weight of history, Cornwallis surrendered. For all intents and purposes, the war for independence had been won. The Treaty of Paris, signed on the 3rd of September 1783, marked Great Britain's formal recognition of the independence of the United States. Yet, the most profound lesson of this saga doesn't lie in the military triumph over an empire. It lies in a much greater act performed by George Washington after the dust had settled. On the 23rd of December, 1783, in a simple yet monumental ceremony, he resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief and returned his military power to the civilian Congress. In the Europe of that era, a victorious general was expected to seize absolute power, becoming a king or a dictator. Washington chose a different path. He returned to Mount Vernon, his beloved farm, to live the life of a private citizen. When King George III heard of this extraordinary act, he reportedly remarked, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." And perhaps that is the most accurate description of him. Winning power is an immense feat, but voluntarily and serenely walking away from it when it is within your grasp requires a level of character and moral fortitude that is truly rare in human history. In the aftermath of the war, though independent, the states remained a loose and fractious collection. The Articles of Confederation proved too weak to sustain a young nation, which nearly disintegrated under the weight of debt, economic instability, and internal bickering. Recognizing the crisis, leaders met in 1787 to draft a new constitution, creating a stronger, more balanced federal government. In 1789, George Washington was sworn in as the first president of the United States. The war for independence had been won, but the task of building a just and stable nation had only just begun a journey requiring the vision and courage of an entire generation. It is at this point that the American Revolution offers a value far greater than a mere history lesson. If we look closely, it is not just a story of defeating a colonial power or overthrowing foreign rule. It is a deeper narrative about a society learning to grow up, learning the art of self-governance after the prize of liberty has been won. History is full of people who rose up and shed blood to topple old regimes. But few have had the wisdom to ask the hardest question after the victory. What kind of nation shall we become? What kind of society will we build? This is where the true character of a generation is tested. It requires courage not just in battle, but in the quiet, difficult work of construction and compromise. What haunts me most is not the gunfire at Lexington or the surrender at Yorktown. It is the image of the ordinary people, farmers, artisans, shopkeepers, who paid for our modern freedoms with their lives, their blood, and their tears. We speak of the revolution, but we often forget the father who left home, never knowing if he would see his children again, or the mother who saw her son off to war with the gut-wrenching fear that she would never hold him again, or the young soldier standing in the biting cold, feet bleeding for lack of shoes, stomach cramped with hunger, yet refusing to leave the line. We are easily moved by the glory of victory, but we rarely pause long enough to feel the crushing weight of the price paid for it. History is often recorded as a list of battles and treaties, but it is truly kept alive by the silent tears of the nameless. It is built on the fear of being swallowed by the earth, yet choosing to march forward anyway. If we forget the human soul of history, the sleepless nights, and the quiet sacrifices, we are left with nothing but cold dates and dry facts. We lose the understanding of why these events still carry such weight today. Therefore, the greatest lesson of this story is that liberty is never a finished gift. It is not an inherent privilege that falls from the sky. Freedom always comes tied to heavy responsibility. A sustainable society cannot rely solely on the bravery of war. It must be sustained by kindness, self-restraint, and a deep sense of civic duty during times of peace. To defeat an empire is a miracle, but to build just laws, to respect democratic institutions, and to accept dissent without destroying one another, that is an even greater miracle. It is the true measure of a nation's maturity. For those who have lived long lives and seen the world's ups and downs, this story likely resonates on a very personal level. As we age, we realize that the most precious things aren't the loud cheers of a single victory, but the things that endure afterward. A home still standing, a family still united by love, a country that retains its dignity, and a generation of children who understand the value of their inheritance. We retell these stories not just to admire the past, but to remind the present not to live with ingratitude, not to forget the price that was paid for the air we breathe. The most dangerous threat to a nation is not an external enemy with weapons and armies. It is when the descendants of those who sacrificed everything begin to forget how their freedom was forged, how it is maintained, and how quickly it can vanish if treated as an effortless certainty. A nation can survive the most devastating war, but it might not survive the erasure of its history, deep internal division, and the apathy of its own citizens. The birth of America serves as a perpetual warning of that truth. If we must hold on to one core truth from this vast narrative, it is this: those at Lexington, Concord, Trenton, Saratoga, and Yorktown did not fight so their children could live in hollow pride. They fought so their children would live worthy of that legacy. They fought so we would value our right to speak, to choose, to debate, and to live according to our conscience. They fought so we would know that a strong nation is not just defined by its military or economy, but by citizens who refuse to lose their moral character. Power, in any form, must always be tethered to the law and the will of the people. Liberty only finds its true meaning when it is accompanied by morality, responsibility, and carefully preserved memory. There are moments in the life of every person and every nation when doing the right thing is no longer easy or safe, when silence and submission feel like the most attractive choices. But the history of the United States began with people who bravely refused that silence. They were afraid, they suffered, they lost so much. But they stood firm at Lexington, marched through the freezing cold, and held on when everything seemed lost. Their story still moves us today, reminding us of the eternal value of freedom and the power of human courage. If this story has settled in your mind, let it be more than a dry page of history. Let it echo as a grand anthem to the human spirit, a reminder of the responsibility each of us carries to protect humane ideals and the enduring power of memory in shaping the future. This is not just a story of battles. It is a lesson in the difficult choices made when people face injustice and decide to act, not just for themselves, but for the shared values of all humanity. The journey of sharing this story begins within your own home. where sacred values are nurtured and passed down through generations. Tell it to your loved ones, especially your children, the seedlings of the future. Let them understand that the freedom and independence they enjoy are the fruits of the sweat, tears, and blood of those who came before. These silent sacrifices were not just deaths on a battlefield, but a relentless struggle for a better future, where every individual has the right to live with freedom and dignity. As long as we carry these memories in the sanctuary of our hearts and retell these epic chapters of history with the reverence they deserve, as long as we truly cherish the profound weight of every breath of freedom they fought to give, us, then, those who fell since that fateful morning at Lexington, will never be mere names etched in cold stone. Instead, they will live on forever, flowing through the vast currents of our history and vibrating within the very heartbeat of each of us. They serve as a lighthouse, casting a brilliant glow upon the path for all generations to come. Their lives remain a constant reminder that an indomitable spirit and an unyielding thirst for liberty are the most precious legacies we possess. It is a sacred heritage that must be protected and passed forward for eternity, honored not merely through the eloquence of our words, but through the depth and conviction of our actions every single day.